The evidence locker's fluorescent lights hummed like dying insects as Torino's hands trembled over the manila folder. Inside were photographs that would rewrite history, images of bruising patterns inconsistent with suicide, toxicology results showing exotic compounds not found in any pharmacy. The real story of how Marilyn Monroe died. He'd been ordered to destroy them, clean house, make the inconvenient truth disappear like morning fog off the Potomac. But the voice he'd overheard in Hoover's office an hour earlier still echoed in his skull. Moscow will be pleased with our cooperation. Russian accented English, smooth as bourbon, deadly as arsenic. Torino struck the match. The flame cast dancing shadows across Monroe's lifeless face in the photographs. One quick motion and the evidence would burn. The director's secret would be safe. America's secret would be safe. Except America wasn't the country being protected. The match burned down to his fingers. He cursed, dropping it as the flame died against the concrete floor. His hands shook as he lit another. Through the ventilation grate above, footsteps echoed from the director's office. Heavy boots, military precision. They were coming to check on his progress. Torino made a decision that would haunt him for the next 60 years. He photographed every page with the Minolta camera hidden in his briefcase. Click, the autopsy report showing lethal injection marks. Click, photos of a struggle. Click, the real toxicology results revealing a Soviet-developed paralytic agent. Then he torched the originals. The flames consumed Monroe's true death in seconds, leaving only ash and the acrid smell of burning truth. Torino swept the remains into an evidence bag, his mind racing. He'd given them what they wanted, destruction of the evidence, but the copies hidden in his camera would be his insurance policy. The footsteps stopped outside the door. Torino, the voice belonged to Deputy Director Tolson, Hoover's attack dog. Status report, evidence destroyed, sir, complete incineration. And you understand the consequences of discussing tonight's activities? Torino looked up at Tolson's pale, fish-like eyes. Behind him stood two men in expensive suits who definitely weren't bureau. One checked his watch, a distinctive Soviet-made Poljot. The other lit a cigarette, with hands that bore the telltale nicotine stains of a heavy smoker. But his movements were too controlled, too practiced. Military training. Crystal clear, sir. Good. Because associate directors who forget their loyalty oaths have unfortunate accidents. Car crashes, heart attacks. Sometimes they simply disappear. The Russian with the watch stepped forward. Mr. Torino, your service tonight ensures continued prosperity for your family. Your wife, your young son. They live on Elm Street, yes? Nice neighborhood. Safe. We prefer it remains that way. Ice flooded Torino's veins. They knew everything. His address, his family, his weakness. We have understanding? The Russian continued, his accent now undisguised. Yes, excellent. You are patriot, Mr. Torino, true American patriot. The men filed out, leaving Torino alone with the ashes of American democracy. He'd just witnessed the FBI's associate director taking orders from Soviet agents. Edgar Hoover, the man who'd built his career hunting communist infiltrators, was working for Moscow, and Marilyn Monroe had died because she'd discovered it. Torino sealed the ash-filled evidence bag and walked toward the exit, the camera heavy in his briefcase. Each step echoed like a gunshot in the empty corridor. He was now the sole keeper of a secret that could destroy the United States government. Outside, Washington, D.C. slept peacefully under a canopy of stars, unaware that their protectors had become their betrayers. Torino drove home through empty streets, knowing his life had fundamentally changed. He could never be Vincent Torino, loyal FBI associate director, again. He was now Vincent Torino, keeper of the most dangerous secret in American history. The next morning's headlines would report Marilyn Monroe's tragic suicide barbiturate overdose, case closed. The Warren Commission would later conclude President Kennedy died from a lone gunman's bullets. The Cold War would rage on for decades, with Hoover feeding intelligence to the very enemy he claimed to fight. And Torino would spend the next 15 years taking orders from a Soviet asset, documenting every betrayal, every secret sold to Moscow, building a case he could never prosecute without destroying himself and his family. Until tonight, when someone had delivered that evidence back to his doorstep. Standing in his Georgetown study, holding the manila envelope that contained photographs that should have burned 60 years ago, Torino understood with crystalline clarity. His past had finally come to collect its debt. The note attached was simple: "Your turn to talk." Outside his window, a black sedan idled across the street, exhaust visible in the December cold. The same make and model that had followed him home from the evidence locker in 1962. Torino reached for the revolver in his desk drawer, muscle memory from decades of bureau training taking over. The hunter had become the hunted. Introduction. The revolver's weight felt foreign in Torino's arthritic hands. 15 years of running a quiet security firm had softened the calluses that once marked him as a federal agent. The gun trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the inevitable betrayal of age. At 62, his reflexes belonged to a different man, one who died in that evidence locker decades ago. He set the weapon on his mahogany desk, beside the manila envelope that had shattered his carefully constructed piece. The photograph spilled across the leather blotter: Monroe's bruised neck, the injection site hidden beneath her hairline, toxicology results that screamed murder, images he'd hoped never to see again. Through the frosted window panes, the black sedan's exhaust continued its ghostly dance in the December air. Torino counted the seconds between each puff. Engine running, professional surveillance. They weren't trying to hide anymore. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed midnight, its brass pendulum catching lamplight. A wedding gift from his late wife Elena. Its steady rhythm had measured 38 years of marriage, 15 years of widowerhood, and countless sleepless nights haunted by Monroe's ghost. Tonight, it sounded like a countdown. Torino moved to his safe, hidden behind a reproduction of Washington crossing the Delaware. His fingers remembered the combination: Elena's birthday followed by the date Monroe died. Inside lay the insurance policy he'd carried for 6 decades, the original photographs he'd taken that night, along with 15 years of meticulous documentation. Every Soviet contact, every piece of intelligence Hoover had fed to Moscow, every American asset compromised. Evidence that could rewrite Cold War history. Evidence that could destroy him. A key turned in the front door's lock. Torino's pulse spiked before recognition set in. Only 2 people had keys to his Georgetown townhouse: his housekeeper, who came Wednesdays, and, "Grandpa, your lights are on. Everything okay?" Sarah's voice carried the warmth that had sustained him through the loneliest years. At 28, she possessed Elena's fierce intelligence and her grandfather's stubborn pursuit of truth. An investigative journalist for the Washington Herald, she specialized in government corruption, following stories wherever they led. The irony wasn't lost on him. His granddaughter had dedicated her life to exposing the very secrets he'd spent his protecting. He swept the photographs back into the envelope, hands moving with practiced efficiency despite their tremor. The safe door clicked shut just as Sarah's footsteps reached the study. "Working late again?" She leaned against the doorframe, auburn hair catching the lamplight. Elena's hair, Elena's questioning green eyes. "Mrs. Patterson called me, said she saw suspicious cars on the street." Mrs. Patterson, 83 years old, former State Department secretary, and the neighborhood's unofficial intelligence network. During the Cold War, she'd tracked Soviet diplomatic comings and goings with mathematical precision. Now she monitored Georgetown's streets with the same dedication. "Probably nothing," Torino said, though his eyes drifted to the window. The sedan remained. "You know how she worries." Sarah stepped into the room, her journalist's instinct scanning the details. The open desk drawer, his pallor, the faint smell of adrenaline and old fear that clung to him like cologne. "You look like you've seen a ghost." If only you knew, he thought. Instead, he managed a smile. "Just reviewing some old case files. Private security can be surprisingly nostalgic." She moved closer, and he caught the scent of her perfume. Something light and hopeful that reminded him life still held beauty worth protecting. Sarah was his vulnerability, the one person whose safety mattered more than buried secrets or national security. She was also the one person who would never stop digging if she sensed a story. "Speaking of nostalgia," she said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk, "I've been working on something that might interest you. A piece about FBI cover-ups from the 60s. Amazing how many suspicious deaths were ruled suicides back then." Ice crystallized in Torino's chest. "Sarah." Marilyn Monroe, for instance. Did you know there were inconsistencies in the original autopsy? Photos that went missing? Witnesses who died in car accidents? Her eyes lit with the fervor he'd learned to fear. I've been tracking down retired FBI agents who might remember details. Amazing how many of them refused to talk. The grandfather clock's ticking grew thunderous. Outside, the sedan's engine note changed, a subtle shift that meant movement, preparation. Some secrets are better left buried, Torino said quietly. You sound like every source who's hung up on me. Sarah leaned forward. Grandpa, you were associate director during that period. Did you ever hear anything about Monroe's death that didn't make the papers? The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Torino looked at his granddaughter, brilliant, fearless, utterly innocent of the forces she was poking with a stick, and realized his past hadn't just come to collect its debt, it had come for her. Through the window, the black sedan's doors opened. Two figures emerged, their movements professional and purposeful. Time was up. Grandpa? Sarah's voice carried new concern. You look... The doorbell rang. 3 precise chimes that might as well have been gunshots. Torino's mind raced through possibilities. The back exit led to an alley, but they'd have it covered. The panic room Elena had insisted on during his bureau days was 2 floors up, too far, too exposed. His revolver lay 6 inches away on the desk, but drawing it would only escalate a situation he needed to control. Most importantly, Sarah was here. Whatever these men wanted, whatever price his past demanded, she couldn't become collateral damage. Were you expecting someone? Sarah started to rise. Stay. The command came out harder than intended, carrying decades of federal authority. She froze, eyes widening. Stay exactly where you are. The bell rang again, patient, confident. They knew he wasn't going anywhere. Torino moved to the window, angling his body to avoid silhouetting. Through the sheer curtains, he could see the man at his door, mid-50s. Expensive overcoat, hands visible and empty. Professional courtesy. They were offering him a conversation before it became something else. Behind him, Sarah's breathing had changed. The journalist in her was processing details, his sudden tension, the way he'd positioned himself at the window, the gun on the desk she'd finally noticed. Jesus Christ, Grandpa, what's going on? The doorbell gave way to knocking. Firm, measured beats that wouldn't wake the neighbors but conveyed inevitability. They would wait exactly long enough to seem reasonable, then they would enter with or without invitation. Torino's phone buzzed against his hip. Unknown number, local area code. He answered without speaking. Mr. Torino. The voice carried a slight accent, Russian but educated in expensive American universities. I believe you have received our package. I'm not alone, we know. Your granddaughter Sarah Beth Torino, age 28, employed by Washington Herald, Georgetown University alumna, Dean's List, lives alone at 1247 Wisconsin Avenue, apartment 4 billions. Drives a blue Honda Civic, license plate KTM 4472. The recitation hit like physical blows. They knew everything. Where she lived, worked, the car she drove. The same methodical intelligence gathering that had trapped him 60 years ago was now focused on the only person who mattered. She has nothing to do with this. Perhaps she has everything to do with this. We understand she has been asking questions about Marilyn Monroe, speaking to retired federal agents, reviewing old case files. Sarah was watching him now with growing alarm, her journalistic instincts fully engaged. She'd heard enough one-sided conversations to recognize a threat when it materialized. She doesn't know anything. Yet. But she is persistent, yes? Like terrier with bone. Very American trait, this refusal to stop digging. A pause. Invite us in, Mr. Torino. We have much to discuss. The line went dead. Through the window, Torino watched the man at his door straighten his tire signal. Whatever patience they'd shown was ending. The second man moved from the shadows, positioning himself with clear sight lines to the study's windows. Sarah stood abruptly. I'm calling the police. No. Torino turned from the window, his face carrying an expression she'd never seen, not her grandfather's gentle concern, but the hard calculation of a man who'd spent decades in rooms where wrong decisions ended in body bags. The police can't help us. Us? Grandpa, what the hell? Listen very carefully. He moved to the safe, his fingers working the combination. In 30 seconds, I'm going to open that door. 2 men will come in. They will be polite, professional, and absolutely lethal if they feel threatened. The safe opened. Torino retrieved a thick folder, his complete dossier on Hoover's Soviet connections, 15 years of evidence that could topple governments, his real insurance policy. They want information I've kept hidden for 60 years, information that certain people would kill to protect. Sarah's face had gone pale. Information about what? The knocking stopped. Outside, Torino heard the subtle scrape of metal against metal lock picks working his front door. They were done asking permission. He looked at his granddaughter, memorizing her face. Whatever happened next would shatter the careful distance he'd maintained between his past and present. The quiet life he'd built, the grandfather she'd known, all of it was about to die. Information about how Marilyn Monroe really died, and who gave the order. The front door's lock turned with an audible click. Footsteps echoed in his foyer, measured, unhurried, absolutely confident. 2 sets, just as he'd expected. His past had finally arrived to settle accounts. Torino clutched the thick folder against his chest, 60 years of secrets pressed between his ribs and trembling hands. The footsteps in his foyer moved with practiced silence, professional hunters who'd done this dance before. Sarah's breathing came sharp and shallow behind him, her world tilting as everything she'd known about her grandfather crumbled in real time. Vincent Torino. The voice carried cultured authority, Russian accent polished by decades in America. We meet at last. 2 men appeared in the study doorway. The first was older, silver-haired, wearing a charcoal overcoat that cost more than most people's cars. His companion was younger, broader, with the dead eyes of a man who killed for salary rather than passion. Both kept their hands visible, a professional courtesy that fooled no one. "I know who you are," Torino said, though he'd never seen either face before. The accent, the bearing, the way they moved through his house like they owned it, Moscow's finest, probably cultural attaché office covers. The kind of deep-cover operators Hoover had spent decades pretending to hunt while feeding them intelligence. "Do you?" The older man smiled, settling uninvited into Elena's favorite reading chair. "I am Dmitry Volkov. My colleague is Mr. Petrov. We represent interested parties who wish to discuss your recent correspondence." Sarah shifted behind him. "Grandpa, who are these people?" "Journalists," Volkov said pleasantly, his eyes never leaving Torino's face. "Like yourself, Miss Torino. We investigate old stories, seek truth buried by time and politics." The lie was smooth as aged whiskey. Sarah's training kicked in. She'd interviewed enough dangerous men to recognize predators wearing civilized masks. "You broke into my grandfather's house." "Invited ourselves," Petrov corrected, his English carrying a heavier accent. "Mr. Torino was expecting us." Torino measured distances, 6 feet to the desk and his revolver, 12 feet to Sarah. The younger man's coat bulged at the hip, right-handed draw, probably Makarov pistol. The older one kept his hands folded, but something metallic glinted in his lap. "Sarah, go upstairs." "No." Her voice carried the stubborn streak that had driven her success as a journalist. "If this is about my Monroe investigation." "Your Monroe investigation?" Volkov leaned forward with genuine interest. "How fascinating. Please tell us about this investigation." Warning bells screamed in Torino's mind. They weren't here just for him. They were fishing for information about Sarah's work. How much did she know? How close had she come to dangerous truths? "She doesn't know anything," he said quickly. "Let her speak for herself." Volkov's tone remained conversational, but steel showed underneath. "Miss Torino, what have you discovered about Marilyn Monroe's death?" Sarah glanced at her grandfather, then straightened with the defiance that had made her enemies at the Herald. "Enough to know the official story is bullshit. Enough to know people are still scared of the truth." Petrov shifted slightly, and Torino caught the motion hand drifting toward his weapon. Whatever Sarah said next could determine whether they walked out of this room alive. "Inconsistencies in the autopsy," she continued, oblivious to the danger. "Missing evidence. FBI agents who refused to talk or who've died in suspicious accidents. Someone worked very hard to bury whatever really happened. And you believe what that? She was murdered?" Volkov asked. "I believe someone with serious power wanted her silenced." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Volkov's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something Arctic underneath. Dangerous speculation, Miss Torino. Careers have ended for less. Are you threatening me? I am advising you. His eyes moved to Torino. Both of you. Some secrets serve important purposes. Some graves should remain undisturbed. Torino felt the weight of the folder in his hands, evidence that could expose decades of Soviet penetration, proof that the Cold War had been compromised from the highest levels. His insurance policy, and now his death warrant. What do you want? Cooperation, discretion, understanding that certain historical events are best left to historians rather than journalists. Volkov stood, brushing imaginary lint from his coat. Your granddaughter's investigation has attracted attention from parties who prefer privacy. This attention can be redirected. Or, Sarah demanded. Petrov answered by letting his coat fall open, revealing the Makarov in its shoulder holster. Not a threat, just a reminder of professional capabilities. Young idealists suffer unfortunate accidents, Volkov said quietly. Car crashes on icy roads, random muggings gone wrong, apartment fires caused by faulty wiring. Rage flooded Torino's system, not the cold fury of his federal years, but the primal wrath of a grandfather watching predators circle his family. His hand twitched toward the desk drawer. Touch her and You'll what? Publish your little collection? Volkov nodded toward the folder. Destroy yourself and accomplish nothing. We both know how this ends, Mr. Torino. The only question is whether Miss Sarah survives your stubbornness. The grandfather clock chimed once 12:30, time crawling forward while his world collapsed. Behind him, Sarah was putting pieces together with journalist's intuition, her breathing changing as understanding dawned. Whatever happened next, his granddaughter would never see him the same way again. The quiet man was about to become very dangerous. Sarah. His voice held quiet authority. Sit down. She remained standing, defiance blazing in her eyes. I'm not. Sit down. The command cracked like a whip, carrying enough buried menace that even Volkov's eyebrows rose slightly. Sarah dropped into the chair behind her, suddenly seeing glimpses of the man her grandfather had been before retirement softened his edges. Torino faced the Russians, calculating odds. Petrov's hand rested near his weapon, but he was overconfident close quarters, civilian environment, probably expecting an old man's capitulation. Volkov radiated the arrogance of someone accustomed to cooperation through threat alone. They hadn't expected resistance. That gave him perhaps 30 seconds of advantage. You want to know what happened to Marilyn Monroe? Torino opened the folder, revealing photographs that made Volkov lean forward despite himself. She died because she stumbled onto something that would have rewritten the Cold War. Grandpa, don't, Sarah started. She's already in this, he said without taking his eyes off the Russians. Thanks to you, she's been asking the right questions to the wrong people. Questions about FBI cover-ups. Questions about missing evidence. Questions that led her to sources who've been feeding information back to Moscow for 60 years. Volkov's composure cracked. You are making dangerous accusations. I'm stating facts. Torino pulled out a photograph of Monroe's body, but not the staged scene the world had seen. This showed different positioning, different evidence, the careful arrangement of a crime scene being sanitized. J. Edgar Hoover didn't kill Marilyn to protect the Kennedys' secrets. He killed her to protect his own. Sarah's sharp intake of breath filled the room. Behind her journalist's training, behind years of investigating corruption, the magnitude of what she was hearing hit like a physical blow. Hoover was a Soviet asset, Torino continued, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Had been since 1947. Monroe found evidence, photographs, recordings, documented payments. She was going to expose him. Impossible, Petrov said, but his certainty wavered. Is it? Who better to protect Soviet interests than the man running American counterintelligence? Who else could have buried so many investigations, misdirected so much attention, fed Moscow our most sensitive operations? Torino's laugh held no humor. You think your people were that much smarter than ours? Or did they have help from the inside? Volkov stood slowly, his earlier pleasantness completely gone. Even if such fantasies were true, they died with Hoover decades ago. Ancient history serves no one, except it didn't die. Torino pulled out more documents, bank records, coded communications, a web of connections spanning decades. The network Hoover built outlived him. Sleeper agents he recruited, Soviet assets he protected, American officials he compromised. Some of them are still active. The room's temperature seemed to plummet. Petrov's hand moved to his weapon, professional instincts overriding caution. Sarah sat frozen, understanding that her grandfather wasn't just revealing history, he was confessing to participating in it. "You helped," she whispered. "You helped cover it up." The words hit harder than any Russian threat. Torino saw himself reflected in his granddaughter's eyes, not the gentle patriarch she'd known, but a man who'd spent decades protecting traitors and burying truth. The cost of his silence wasn't just personal. It was the corruption of everything she dedicated her life to fighting. "I was 28, he said quietly, "younger than you are now. Hoover showed me photographs of your grandmother Elena before we were married, leaving her apartment, walking to work, laughing with friends." He explained how accidents happened to people who couldn't maintain discretion. Sarah's face went white. Grandma knew? No one knew. That was the point. The admission tasted like ash. "I spent 40 years watching Soviet agents walk free, knowing they were protected by our own system. I documented everything, names, operations, evidence, but I never acted on it. Because you were a coward," Sarah said, each word a blade. "Because I was in love." He met her eyes, letting her see the full weight of his choices. "Elena mattered more than justice. You matter more than justice. I sold my country's secrets to keep my family safe." Volkov relaxed slightly, misreading the confession as capitulation. "Then you understand our position. Your granddaughter's investigation threatens to unravel arrangements that have served both our countries well. Certain sleeping dogs should remain undisturbed." But Sarah was already moving, her chair scraping backward as pieces clicked into place. "The Herald article I'm writing. You've been monitoring it. The sources who died, the evidence that disappeared, you've been cleaning up." "Maintenance," Petrov said. "Nothing personal, like hell." Her voice carried growing fury. "How many people have you killed to protect this?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Outside, snow had begun falling again. Georgetown's genteel streets hiding the kind of darkness that had defined Torino's entire adult life. Whatever happened next, there would be no more hiding from what he'd become. But Torino was studying Petrov's face, watching micro-expressions that spoke louder than words. The younger man's eyes held the flat certainty of someone who'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Professional killers wore their work differently than bureaucrats, and Petrov wore it like a comfortable suit. "How many?" Torino pressed, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd interrogated enough assets to recognize lies. Petrov shrugged. "Does it matter?" Hoover's network required occasional restructuring. The casual admission hit Sarah like a slap. "You're talking about murder. We are talking about preservation," Volkov corrected smoothly. "Your country and mine reached certain understandings decades ago. Hoover's arrangement provided stability, prevented unnecessary conflicts. When people threaten that stability, you eliminate them." Torino felt puzzle pieces clicking together in his mind, forming a picture that made his blood run cold. The sources Sarah contacted for her Monroe investigation. The retired agents who agreed to talk. They're all dead, aren't they? Sarah's face went ashen as memory cascaded through her phone calls that went unanswered, meetings that never happened, obituaries for men who'd promised to reveal secrets and died before they could speak. She'd attributed it to coincidence, to the natural mortality of elderly sources. Now she saw the systematic execution hidden behind heart attacks and accidents. "All of them?" she whispered. "Not all," Volkov said with bureaucratic precision. "Some proved amenable to reason." Torino laughed bitterly. "Reason, is that what you called it when you approached me 15 years ago? When I opened my security firm and you made it clear my client list would benefit from certain considerations?" The confession hit Sarah like a physical blow. She stared at her grandfather, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time, not just the man who'd covered up Monroe's murder, but someone who'd spent 15 years in active collaboration with foreign agents. His successful security business, his comfortable retirement, the clients who'd made him wealthy, all of it built on continued betrayal. "Your private security firm," she said slowly. "It's a front, not a front, a service." Torino's voice carried the weight of accumulated shame. "I provide discreet protection for certain individuals, ensure their privacy remains intact. Government officials, business leaders, people whose secrets serve larger purposes. Soviet assets," Sarah breathed. "Assets who ensure peace between our nations," Volkov interjected. "Your grandfather has performed valuable work preventing unnecessary conflicts." But Sarah was beyond listening to justifications. She stood abruptly, her chair toppling backward as fury overwhelmed shock. "You son of a bitch, you're still doing it. You're still protecting them." Torino couldn't meet her eyes. For 15 years he'd told himself he was choosing family over country, love over duty. But watching his granddaughter's face crumble, seeing the journalist in her recognize the magnitude of his betrayal, he understood what he'd really chosen: comfort over conscience, safety over truth. "The manila envelope," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength as understanding crystallized. "The Monroe autopsy photos that started this, they came from you." "No, yes." Her journalistic instincts were fully engaged now, following evidence trails with ruthless precision. "You sent them to yourself. Created a crisis you could control. Made yourself look like a victim instead of a perpetrator." Volkov's eyebrows rose with genuine surprise. "Is this true?" Torino's silence was answer enough. The folder in his hands, his supposed insurance policy, suddenly looked different. Not evidence gathered in secret, but bait in an elaborate trap designed to draw out other survivors of Hoover's conspiracy. A way to identify remaining threats while maintaining his cover as a reluctant participant rather than willing collaborator. "How long?" Sarah demanded. "How long have you been hunting your own people?" 15 years, he admitted quietly. "Since I opened the firm." The number hit like a body blow. 15 years of systematic betrayal, of identifying and eliminating anyone who might threaten the network Hoover had built. Torino hadn't been protecting Soviet interests out of fear. He'd been protecting them because it was profitable. Volkov stood, his earlier tension replaced by something approaching respect. "Impressive work, Mr. Torino. Your reports have been most thorough." But Petrov was watching Sarah with predatory calculation. "The granddaughter remains a problem." "Yes," Volkov agreed. "Knowledge without wisdom is dangerous. Miss Torino has learned too much without understanding the larger context." Sarah backed toward the window, finally recognizing the trap she'd walked into. Not a confrontation between her grandfather and foreign agents, but a family meeting where she was the outsider. The threat. "You're going to kill me," she said simply. Torino looked at his granddaughter, really looked at her, and saw Elena's fierce integrity staring back at him. The woman he'd claimed to protect through decades of compromise would have died before collaborating with her country's enemies. He'd corrupted everything he'd tried to save. "No," he said quietly, his hand moving toward the desk drawer. "They're not." "Vincent," Volkov said carefully, "you are making an emotional decision. Think about what you're sacrificing." "I am." Torino kept the weapon low but ready, muscle memory from 4 decades of federal service overriding the tremor in his hands. "I'm thinking about what I already sacrificed." Sarah pressed against the window, watching her grandfather transform before her eyes. The gentle patriarch she'd known was vanishing, replaced by someone harder, more dangerous, the man who'd survived J. Edgar Hoover's FBI and 40 years of buried secrets. 62 years old, Torino continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. 15 years of collaboration. 47 years since I first lied to protect a traitor. You want to know what that does to a man? What it costs? Petrov's hand froze halfway to his weapon. Close quarters, civilian environment, armed opposition. The tactical situation had shifted beyond his comfort zone. Everything. Torino answered his own question. It costs everything. I told myself I was protecting Elena, protecting Sarah, but Elena died without ever knowing what I'd become, and Sarah spent her career fighting the kind of corruption I enabled. Grandpa, Sarah started. No. His eyes never left the Russians. You deserve the truth, all of it. Marilyn Monroe died because she found proof that Hoover was feeding Soviet intelligence to Moscow. Documents, recordings, evidence that would have destroyed him. and exposed a network of American traitors stretching back to 1947. Volkov's composure cracked further. Ancient history serves no purpose. It serves truth. Torino pulled photographs from the folder with his free hand, not just Monroe's crime scene, but surveillance photos of Soviet handlers, bank records showing payments, decoded cables revealing decades of American secrets flowing east. Hoover recruited assets in every agency: State Department, Pentagon, CIA. Some of them are still active. Sarah's breathing changed as she processed the magnitude of it. The sources who died while I was researching Monroe, they weren't just covering up a murder, they were protecting active espionage operations. Operations worth billions in defense contracts, policy decisions, strategic intelligence, Torino confirmed, worth killing to protect. Petrov's patience snapped. His hand completed its journey to his weapon, the Makarov clearing leather with fluid precision. But Torino had been expecting federal training, trumped retirement rust as the Colt rose in a smooth arc. Stop. The command cracked like a whip, backed by 40 years of authority and the steady aim of a man who'd faced down congressional committees and organized crime bosses. Sarah, move away from the window. She obeyed instinctively, shifting toward the door while Petrov weighed odds with professional calculation. Close quarters, unknown capabilities, civilian witnesses, variables that complicated clean extraction. This accomplishes nothing, Volkov said, his diplomatic mask slipping to reveal something colder underneath. Kill us, and others will come. Our organization extends beyond this room. I know. Torino's voice carried the weight of accumulated knowledge. 15 years of reports. 15 years of identifying threats and marking targets. You think I didn't keep copies? The admission hung in the air like cordite smoke. Sarah stared at her grandfather, understanding dawning in her journalist's mind he hadn't just been eliminating threats to Soviet operations, he'd been documenting them. Insurance, she whispered. Evidence. He met her eyes, letting her see the full scope of his long game. Every name, every operation, every American official compromised by Hoover's network. Hidden where your newspaper friends will find it if something happens to me. Volkov's diplomatic composure shattered completely. You are bluffing. Am I? 15 years of pretending to hunt American patriots while actually hunting Soviet assets. 15 years of gathering proof that will burn your entire network to the ground. Torino's smile held no warmth. You wanted to know what Marilyn Monroe died for? She died because she threatened to expose one traitor. I can expose hundreds. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Outside, snow continued falling on Georgetown's pristine streets, blanketing a world where 60-year-old secrets were still worth killing for. Petrov's weapon remained steady, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Volkov stood frozen, calculating the cost of violence against the price of retreat. The question, Torino continued, is whether you're willing to start a war to keep your secrets buried. Because that's what killing us means: exposure, investigation, congressional hearings that will drag every Soviet asset into daylight. Sarah found her voice, journalist instincts overriding fear. The Herald already has part of the story. My Monroe investigation. If I disappear now, they'll dig deeper, Torino finished, and they'll find everything. The standoff stretched like a held breath. 3 generations of Cold War paranoia balanced on a knife's edge. Whatever happened next would determine whether 60 years of buried truth finally saw daylight, or died with them in a Georgetown study where snow muffled the sound of gunfire. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Torino watched Petrov's eyes, reading the micro-calculations of a professional killer weighing impossible odds. Behind that flat stare, he saw the moment decision crystallized, not retreat, but the desperate mathematics of mutual destruction. 15 years of evidence, Volkov said finally, his diplomatic veneer cracking like ice. Where? Safe deposit boxes, law firms, insurance policies that activate on my death. Torino's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades in rooms where lies meant death. Congressional staff will receive packages if I miss scheduled check-ins. Your network dies with me, But Sarah was studying her grandfather's face with a journalist's trained eye, reading subtleties that spoke louder than words, the slight tension around his eyes, the careful phrasing, the way his free hand rested protectively over the folder. "You're lying," she said quietly. The accusation hit like a gunshot. Petrov's weapon shifted slightly, professional instincts recognizing the shift in dynamics. Volkov's eyes narrowed, diplomatic training focused on reading truth from deception. "Sarah," Torino started. "No." Her voice gained strength as understanding crystallized. "There are no insurance policies, no scheduled check-ins. You're protecting them even now." The words hung in the air like smoke. Torino met his granddaughter's eyes and saw Elena staring back, the same fierce integrity, the same refusal to accept comfortable lies. The woman he'd claimed to protect through decades of betrayal would have died before collaborating with her country's enemies. 47 years, he said softly, lowering the Colt with hands that suddenly felt ancient. 47 years of choosing family over country, love over duty, safety over truth. Volkov relaxed incrementally, recognizing capitulation disguised as confession. But Sarah moved closer to her grandfather, seeing something the Russians missed, not surrender, but resolution. "Elena would have hated what I became," Torino continued, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated shame. "She married a federal agent who believed in justice. She died thinking she was still married to that man. Grandpa, I was supposed to protect her memory, protect you. Instead, I corrupted everything she stood for." He opened the folder fully, revealing not just photographs and documents, but handwritten notes spanning decades. Names, dates, operations, a lifetime of collaboration documented in his own careful script. 15 years of active betrayal. 47 years of burying truth. Petrov shifted his stance, weapons still trained but attention divided between targets. The old man was confessing, but confessions could turn dangerous when guilt overwhelmed self-preservation. "The Monroe investigation," Sarah said, pieces clicking together in her mind. "You didn't send yourself those photos to create a crisis. You sent them to draw me in." Torino nodded slowly. "I wanted you to stop digging. Thought if you saw how dangerous it was, understood what happened to people who asked too many questions, you'd scare me off." Her voice carried growing understanding. "But you knew I wouldn't stop. You knew I'd dig deeper." The admission sat between them like an unexploded bomb. Volkov's eyebrows rose as implications became clear. This hadn't been family intervention gone wrong, but orchestrated confrontation designed to force resolution. "You wanted this," Sarah whispered. "You wanted us all in the same room." Torino looked at his granddaughter, really looked at her, and saw the journalist who'd spent her career exposing corruption finally understanding the scope of the story she'd stumbled into. Not just Marilyn Monroe's murder, not just Hoover's blackmail empire, but 60 years of systematic betrayal that touched every level of American government. "Elena kept a diary," he said quietly, "hidden in our bedroom for 40 years, found it after she died. August 15th, 1962. Vincent came home different tonight. Something's broken inside him." She knew, she always knew something had changed. The date hung in the air like an epitaph. August 15th, 2 weeks after Monroe's death, 2 weeks after Torino had helped bury the truth about Hoover's network. Elena had watched her husband transform from protector to collaborator without understanding why. "I won't let her granddaughter make the same choice," Torino said, his voice gaining strength with each word. "I won't let you choose family over truth." Sarah's eyes widened as she recognized what was happening. Not confession, but preparation. Her grandfather wasn't surrendering to preserve their safety. He was preparing to destroy everything he'd built to preserve her integrity. "The real evidence," she breathed. "It's here, isn't it?" Torino smiled for the first time in years, the expression transforming his face from haunted to peaceful. "Everything, every name, every operation, every American official Hoover compromised, hidden in plain sight for 15 years. Petrov's finger tightened on the trigger as professional alarm bells screamed warnings. Volkov stepped backward, diplomatic instincts recognizing the moment when negotiation became impossible. Outside, Snow continued falling on Georgetown's pristine streets, blanketing a world where truth finally mattered more than survival. Sarah screamed as her grandfather's body crumpled, the folder's contents scattering across mahogany flooring like fallen leaves. Petrov's Makarov tracked toward her with mechanical precision, but Torino's final act wasn't surrender. His dying hand triggered the hidden device beneath his desk, the one Elena had never known about, installed the day he'd opened his security firm 15 years ago. The study's hidden cameras activated with silent efficiency. Facial recognition software identified Volkov and Petrov, cross-referenced against databases spanning decades. Encrypted files uploaded automatically to servers in 3 countries, triggered by biometric sensors that detected Vincent Torino's heart had stopped beating. "No," Volkov breathed, understanding too late what the old man had orchestrated. Sarah knelt beside her grandfather's body, her hands coming away crimson as she pressed against the spreading stain on his chest. His eyes found hers, still holding that peaceful expression, and his lips moved with almost inaudible words. "Elena's jewelry box. 3rd drawer. Tell them everything." Then Vincent Torino died as he had lived for 60 years, protecting a secret that would outlive him. Petrov moved toward Sarah, but Volkov grabbed his arm. "We leave, now. The girl is already talking to half of Washington by now." Volkov gestured at the blinking lights around the room's perimeter, surveillance equipment that had recorded everything. "He played us perfectly." They vanished into Georgetown's snowy streets, leaving Sarah alone with her grandfather's body and 47 years of buried truth finally clawing toward daylight. 6 months later, Sarah sat in the same chair where she'd watched her grandfather die, surrounded by newspaper clippings that chronicled the systematic dismantling of the largest espionage network in American history. The Herald had won 3 Pulitzers for her Monroe investigation, but the accolades felt hollow against the weight of what she'd lost. Elena's jewelry box sat open on the desk. The 3rd drawer had contained not jewels but microfilm documenting every Soviet asset Torino had identified during his years of pretended collaboration, names that had triggered resignations from state, defense, and the CIA. Senators, congressmen, federal judges, a web of corruption that reached into every corner of American power. The official story credited Vincent Torino as a deep-cover patriot who spent 15 years gathering evidence while appearing to collaborate. The truth was more complex, a broken man seeking redemption through his granddaughter's integrity, choosing to preserve her moral compass, even if it meant destroying everything else he'd built. The Russians had vanished completely. Volkov's diplomatic immunity had been revoked posthumously when his body was found in a Moscow hotel room, apparent suicide. Petrov had simply disappeared, another ghost in the Cold War's endless parade of the dead, and disappeared. Sarah opened her laptop and began typing the epilogue she'd been avoiding for months. "My grandfather died believing he was protecting family over country, love over duty. But in the end, he discovered something Elena had always known, that truth and love are not opposing forces, but the same fierce light viewed from different angles." Snow began falling again outside the Georgetown window, fat flakes that caught the afternoon light like scattered diamonds. Sarah thought about Marilyn Monroe, dead 60 years but finally vindicated, about J. Edgar Hoover, whose legacy of blackmail and corruption had finally collapsed under the weight of documented truth, about Elena Torino, who'd loved a man without knowing what he'd become, but had somehow saved him anyway through the granddaughter who carried her uncompromising spirit. The story would stay with readers long after they closed the paper, Sarah knew. Not because of the spy games or political corruption, but because of an old man who discovered that love sometimes meant destroying everything you'd built to preserve what actually mattered. She saved the document and closed the laptop, finally ready to leave Georgetown behind. But first, she knelt beside the desk where Vincent Torino had died and whispered the words she'd been carrying for 6 months. "I told them everything, Grandpa. Elena would be proud." Outside, snow continued falling on streets where secrets had been currency for 60 years, but where truth, costly, painful, necessary truth, had finally won. The envelope that had started everything sat framed on the wall now, its simple message transformed from threat to promise. "Your turn to talk." Sarah Torino had talked. The world had listened, And somewhere in the space between love and justice, her grandfather had found the peace that had eluded him for 47 years. The story was finished, but it would stay with anyone who understood the price of choosing conscience over comfort, truth over safety, and the terrible, beautiful courage required to love someone enough to let them be better than you ever managed to become.